All right. Here with Frank Zafiro. Zafiro. I appreciate you being here today. When I was looking at all of your information about everything you've done, from fiction books to textbooks to policing, teaching, podcasting, it's a lot of stuff. It's a lot of stuff. What came first for you? Was it policing or writing?
It was writing. I've always been a writer since I was a kid. So uh, for me, that's how I've always identified myself, I guess, internally. So I was always a writer doing other things, even though I very heavily embraced many of those things. But I think if you peeled the onion back all the way to the core, it'd be a writer there that you'd find.
Nice. When you first started writing, what were you doing? Was it like in elementary school or before that?
Well, I think in elementary school I was doing what I call storytelling, and I think what my parents would call lying,
Hmm.
making up stories and stuff. I don't really remember writing anything until I was about 10 or so. But by the time I was 13, I was writing stories all the time. Um, of course, they were all extremely derivative and very short. And I mean, I thought I wrote a book when it was 5 pages long, handwritten, sort of thing. But it does go back that far.
When you started writing, what were your topics that you liked writing about, even back then?
Really kind of fell into two different categories. One was fantasy and science fiction, which was something I just loved and still do and always read at that age and actually never stopped reading it. So I would write either fantasy or science fiction stories, and then occasionally military ones too. Every young boy I think is fascinated by the military, and so I wrote a few military stories too.
When did your when did you figure on policing for a career?
Well, I mean, even certainly as a teenager, I knew, you being a writer didn't mean you know, stepped up onto the nearest stump and proclaimed yourself a writer and somebody started sending you checks.
Hmm.
So I knew I had to do something else career wise. And so I started thinking, what did I want to do when I grew up, besides being a writer? And there was a short period of time where I thought I might want to be a lawyer. But what really emerged was the idea of being a teacher or a police officer. And I think I was attracted to the public service element of both. And certainly the law enforcement, the excitement and grandiose nature of all the books and movies and TV shows I'd seen probably played into that as well. But I decided to go into the military first to get money for college, and then out of a sense of patriotism. This would have been in 1986, so we were at one of the heights of the Cold War with Reagan and Gorbachev kind of at odds a little bit before they got friendlier. And I went in like I said, to get money for college and for patriotism and so forth. And I wrote while I was in the Army, but when I got out of the Army, because the military just wasn't for me, it was too regimented. Too, I asked why too much, I think.
Mm.
So I wasn't a very good soldier in that respect. But I served in military intelligence as a linguist, and which is just one more element of my fascination with language. This just happened to be, foreign languages. And so I found myself out of the Army with a kid on the way, and being a Czech linguist isn't exactly a transferable skill. I mean, if I had been a mechanic or something, I could have probably got a job pretty quick. But there weren't a lot of ad listings in the want ads for wanted Czech linguist. Especially in the Pacific Northwest, where I'm from and where I was living. So I started looking at teaching and policing, and really what it came down to at that point was teaching required a 4-year degree, and I hadn't managed to accomplish that while I was in the military. I got a couple of years done, but not a full undergraduate degree. And policing required about a year and a half of college at the time at the agencies that I was applying to. So it was, I was drawn to both, but this was the one I could start immediately. And so I started, testing for a couple different departments where I was living in California before we went back up to Spokane, and eventually got hired on there at the city police department in Spokane.
You did city policing, and then were you in a sheriff's office too?
No,
Or
there is a sheriff's office, that corresponds with the city police there, approximately the same size. There's a lot of coordination, but no, I did my entire 20-year career with the Spokane Police Department, municipal police department.
So then, how long were you in the military doing that? Was that a 4-year thing?
It was originally a 4-year thing. Then this Snidely Whiplash character named Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait, and so I ended up staying for another 6 or 8 months after my enlistment would have normally been up, due to what they called stop loss. They basically put a freeze on anybody leaving the military until they decided whether you were an essential person or not. And by the time the bureaucracy of the Army got around to making that decision, they decided they didn't need to keep anybody anymore because the conflict was over. So it was about 4.5 years, almost 5 years.
During that time, you said you were still writing, and then when you started doing the policing, did your writing keep going at an even rate, or did you more policing and more just regular work and then writing when you could, or did you always carve out time for writing?
It's a great question, because carving out time is what most people have to do with all the responsibilities we all have in this world. And so, yeah, there was a period of time. I came on the job in 93, and I did start in 95. I wrote the first draft of what became my first novel, my first real novel. But after I made it through probation and got on about 3 years on the job, I started doing something new. Just, every time I'd finish something, I'd be on to something else that I had to learn. I mean, I became a training officer, so I was busy with that. I went back to school at the university to get my degree in history, so I was going to school full time. And I eventually became a corporal, which a whole new set of skills I had to learn. And then became a detective, which is a whole other set of skills, very different set of skills. And then kind of fell backwards into a leadership role. And when I was promoted to sergeant, I really didn't intend to go that route, but it ended up happening. And so from about 96 to 2004, I was doing a lot of writing, but all of it was either police reports or police related, business writing, or I was writing for my history degree for the couple 2.5 years that I had to finish up there. So I did a lot of writing, but I really didn't write any fiction. And it wasn't until my world kind of settled down just a tiny bit, and I was in a little bit more of a stable position, that I was able to re-engage with writing fiction. And at that point, because what I've been doing for the previous 8 years, it was crime fiction that started bubbling out. It wasn't fantasy and sci-fi. It wasn't military. It wasn't, political thrillers or espionage or any of that kind of sort of thing. It was all crime fiction.
Yeah. I wonder how many people that were a couple different things. How many police that ended up police thought about being a lawyer, and how many police end up writing, whether they ever publish anything or show anybody else anything. I mean, the report writing aspect of it is huge. I like a good report. And I think I saw something in your information about either you wrote a book about report writing or teaching report writing or something like that. But
yeah, I wrote a textbook on police report writing.
Yeah. And that
super exciting subject. It just gets people
it
out of their
fits right
seats.
in. Fits right into writing fiction. I mean, you write facts and get to it as concretely as you can, as plainly as you can, with the idea of a jury reading it or a judge looking at it, and then that's how you think it transfers over excellently to writing fiction, because I read Concrete Smile. I think that's what it is.
Yeah.
And you can see the police report writing pedigree in there, where if you read a story like that, you're like, yeah, this feels like the police wrote this. So it's, I find comfort in that. But.
Oh, well, good. I mean, the thing of it is with police report writing is, people think they know how much paperwork cops do. They really don't. There's just so much paperwork. Although today it's all digital, obviously, but paper, you know what I mean when I say paperwork.
Yeah.
And, I used to tell people when I also taught the course at the academy, at the police academy for a period of time. And I would always tell the recruits, look, the number one thing you need to learn here at the academy, the tip of the pyramid that you have to make sure it's non-negotiable that you learn this and you get good at it is officer safety. You have to be able to negotiate this job safely and get yourself and your partner and the civilians, and yes, even the suspects, out of life alive. That's the pinnacle is safety. But there's a second tier of skills beneath that are critical. They're crucial to being successful. I mean, certainly an understanding of criminal law and procedure, ability to interview and interrogate, physical and firearms prowess are important. Communication skills is huge. But among these critical skills, these crucial ones at the second tier is report writing. And of all of them, report writing is the one that people, A, find the most boring, and understand that, and B, tend to gloss over a little bit. And it's kind of almost become a cliche over the decades in police circles that nobody really cares much about the police report until they care about it. In other words, when the report is first written, it's just whatever. But then something bad happens, or somebody complains about the situation, or comes under scrutiny, and nobody expected that it would, and thought it was a big nothing. And now it's being looked at 8 ways to Sunday. And they pull the report, and the report's horrible. It lacks detail. It's muddy, whatever. And that's gotten more agencies and more officers into trouble than a lot of different, than many things. It has an outsized impact on that. And so, that's why I taught the importance of, you have to write a clear, concise, complete, and accurate police report. This is your job. It's part of your job. It's not just something you do when you're not in the middle of a gunfight or a car chase. I mean, it's a key component of the job. And not everybody's a good writer, but you can still, do the bare bones, basic, good report writing, if you follow the kind of the framework that my co-author and I set up for that book. So it isn't exciting. People are probably falling asleep listening to me talk about it here, but a lot of things in life that are very important and have a big impact sometimes aren't super sexy and exciting, but they matter.
Yeah, I would read that textbook on report writing. I like that. The great part about report writing is, even if you weren't good at writing, it taught you how to be good, not only in your handwriting, but in the information you recorded, because you had that framework or template for all the stuff you need. And the more you go into court and the more you're testifying or putting a case together, the more you understand, I need this, 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 and this, and I have to have it. Like, it's a legal requirement. I have to say these things and do these things. So just like with writing, writing helps you think. So if you can't write clearly, you're not thinking clearly. So that's why I liked the good report. And
well, if you think about it, you're writing a police report. What are you doing? It's really the same thing as you're alluding to as when you write a story or a novel. You are painting a picture with words so that somebody else can read those words and see the movie in their head of what you experienced or what you're creating, depending on which we're talking about. And that's an important skill. And often You know, people used to argue sometimes, well, as long as the very, very basics are in the report, I'll get a chance to explain myself if it ever goes to, you know,
Hmm.
if it goes to internal affairs because somebody complained about something, or if it goes to an investigation or a trial, I get on the witness stand. No, you don't always get that chance. I mean,
Yeah.
there are instances, many instances, where rulings are made and decisions are made strictly on the documentation that is available. And so, and it's much the same in fiction. You can't not put things in or not be clear about something because just because it's clear in your head, because if it's not on the page, it's not going to be in the head of the reader. And so, that does translate, I think. Hopefully the dryness, the clinical aspect doesn't translate, but the clarity and the completeness and being concise and certainly being very accurate all should translate.
Yeah. The idea of when you're writing and foreshadowing, I think that is a direct carryover from report writing, because you can't just introduce a thing at the end and not have set the groundwork for it. But like in your story, The Concrete Smile, and usually if a writer, I think if a person has written anything and they read something, when they see things in a story and they go, well, that's got to be in there for a reason, like this little hint about something or whatever, you're like, there's a reason that's in there, whether it was in there when the person wrote it beginning, or if they had to go back at the end and then put little things in. So the breadcrumbs along the way. So it's
Right.
introducing those ideas. Yeah, and I like that in that Concrete Smile story had that in there where you're like, oh, okay, I'm picking up on this. And for report writing, I think the best, most exciting representation of it in movies is the movie Hot Fuzz, with the guy that plays Scotty in the new
Simon Pegg.
Yeah, where he goes this whole explanation. He says you can't do all of that without generating a huge amount of paperwork, and then it has scenes or montages where he's filling out paperwork and stacks and stacks of things. Like, yeah, that's it. And one of the things when I started policing, when you're going through field training, even in the academy, I guess you don't really notice it so much, but when you get out into the real world and you think, these are all the things I need to know, but these are the things that are difficult. And whether you're new and you're trying to put together a DUI case, or something that has a lot more parts than just a regular traffic infraction, or a smaller offense, that instead of shying away from those things, you got to go straight toward them. And if you don't like working crashes, then you need to go work a lot of crashes. And if you don't feel comfortable with DUIs, go get a bunch of DUIs. They're out there. And then just get better at it. Don't get scared of or intimidated by the amount of paperwork or looking foolish in court. That's probably a big driver too for doing good reports, is you want to know how to think and you don't want to represent the department poorly or yourself. But so
and you may go to trial on something a year or often even longer from the time that it occurred. And while we all may think we have an ironclad steel trap memory, science has shown us that memory is pretty fallible. And at least if you write a good report and the details are in the police report, first off, you might not go to trial, because I'll tell you what, prosecutors and defense attorneys get a copy of those reports. And if the report is dog meat, the prosecutor is going to be reluctant to go on the case compared to another case with a good report, just because they can't take them all. And they've got to figure out which ones they're not going to take. And that's a prime reason not to, because if somebody writes a lousy report, maybe it's an indicator of other things they might not be doing so well. Conversely, defense attorneys love those. They love the idea of going to court on a bad report, because even if the cop is a good cop, the bad report's going to be great ammunition for them once they get that officer on the stand. And even a real solid police officer can get shaken up or made to look bad on the witness stand if they wrote a terrible terrible report. So there's one reason to do it, but the other reason is you may not remember the case until you pick up the report and read it. And then once you've read the report, you'll remember it more fully even than what's on the page. Your memory you'll freshen your memory, as the legal term is often used. But if you write it, saw drunk driver arrested same, and that's your report.
Yeah.
What can you do with that?
Yeah. When I was it was before GPS, before a lot of computerized forms. We were still using the GE Aerotron radios that were in Barney Miller, and almost everything was written out. Some stuff you had to type on a typewriter, and then eventually they started using computers. And about the time I left, which was 2012 timeframe, we were a couple years into doing crash reports on a computer, submitting some reports on a computer, and digital cameras were about, just after 2000s, probably digital cameras started to become something. So in the academy, we learned the 35 millimeter camera. Right. And you take all these pictures, you got, all the degrees around a crime scene, and you have 12 rolls of film, and then you find out that 6 of them didn't develop. And just the world of the digital camera made it so much better, even for a regular traffic stop or a big crime, whether you could video things or take pictures of stuff, that would help for report writing, and especially for crashes too. You could just take the pictures of it. You got to determine what's up for the report, but then you have that for your notes. It's great in court, great, especially if you're in, like in Virginia was a fault state. So you'd end up in a bunch of civil things with people suing each other. And if you had those pictures, it was great. So I know you did some stuff with police body cams, and I had a car that had a VHS camera in it. I had it for about a week, and they were like, "Oh, we gave that car to you by mistake," so they took it back. So I had a few cases that I had at least the video of it, that the microphone that clipped on it didn't always work. So sometimes that cuts out, and it makes you look bad because they're like, "Well, how come you turned your mic off? The mic just doesn't work all the time." But I would think policing, no doubt, has changed so much from 2012 to now, just what police have to deal with. But I would welcome a body cam, because it would be great evidence for court. And also it's always in the back of your mind of don't do anything dumb. But it does stink a little, because when you start, you're going to do some dumb things. I'm not talking about infringing on people's rights and throwing them in jail, but every now and then you do something or say something that you learn a lesson with, and you're like, okay, I don't say that anymore, or I don't do things that way. And if you have a supervisor that's out to get you, then a body cam is not going to be your friend. But what's your lessons learned or takeaways from the work you did with body cameras?
Well, I never had to wear one, or I never got to wear one, depending on which philosophy you adhere to. I was a major at the time that this question was coming before our department, and so I spent about a year doing the research necessary to figure out, how do we implement a body camera program? Which body camera system would be the best? What are some of the issues that surround this technology? How do we overcome those, and so forth? And, I think when the assignment was originally given to me, it was almost an afterthought, kind of like, knock this out in a week or two, please. And I came back and said, this is a big issue, and it can have huge ramifications, down the road if we don't do it right. Because like a lot of agencies, sometimes there's so much going on, and people are trying to be expedient and get things done. And occasionally things get done with not the right amount of forethought. And that's how you get stuck with a record management system that doesn't talk to your,
Mm.
dispatch, or, these other, or is, is essentially vaporware at this point. It's not being supported anymore. And so it costs an arm and a leg to have anything done to fix it, because proper work wasn't done up front to buy that kind of a system. Again, not a sexy thing. Hey, what kind of reporting software are we going to buy? What kind of record management system should we implement? Should we have body cameras? How do we do that? But these things have profound impact on the officer on the street, and that's kind of the thing you always have to remember in a leadership role. You had better, I think, is what's the purpose of your existence, your purpose of your agency? What's the core mission of this police department? And most often, you figure out right away that core mission is being supplied by the boots on the ground, the patrol officer in the car, the detective, the civilian support staff, those so-called line workers, or whatever you want to call them. They're the ones doing the heavy lifting. Your role in leadership is to support them. Your role in leadership is to make sure they have the training and the tools and the general compass direction, so they know where they're going, to use those tools and apply that training. And so you can't look at something like, oh, well, body cameras, I don't know, looks like this company's doing pretty good, let's just use those. And then you turn out you buy the complete wrong one, and now your department is saddled with this for a decade. They're locked in. It's like, do you buy a Mac or a PC? Well, whichever one you buy is going to have an impact on the software that you buy to a degree, and peripherals that you buy to go with your PC or your Mac, and so forth. So what I learned was it's a big, huge can of worms to get into, because you forget the technical specifications that you have to be concerned about. Those are many, but it's just storing. How do you handle storing the footage? How long do you store the footage? How do you pay to store the footage? I mean, video footage takes up a lot of gigabytes, and how do you go about doing that? How do you handle freedom of information requests? As you well know, if somebody puts in a request for a PDR, a public disclosure request for a report, unless it's an ongoing investigation, and there are a few other exceptions, but unless it's an ongoing investigation, they're entitled to get a copy of that report. Now, the responsibility of the agency or the government entity that houses these reports is they have to redact it for privacy concerns. I mean, if the report has me as a civilian in it, and they discuss maybe a medical issue I have, or maybe I'm just a witness to something, you shouldn't be able to request a police report and know my home phone number and my address and the fact that I have pancreatic cancer. I mean, that's nobody's business, right? So that stuff gets redacted, and no doubt people have seen redacted reports. That's all fine and good, and there are redaction programs that do some of the redaction automatically and only require a quick review by human eyes to make sure nothing was missed. But how do you redact, absent bringing in a Hollywood editor, I guess, how do you redact footage? What if you're interviewing somebody and the person standing next to them has a right to privacy, but they're on the video? Would you put the blue blob over their face, or whatever? That takes, how you go about doing that is a technical obstacle, and how you pay for it, and when I say pay for it, I'm talking about time mostly here. I mean, that's a lot of time, and maybe it's automated now. I don't know. I left the job about a decade ago, and so much of my information is certainly dated. So maybe there's software now that handles that. If you mark somebody in the first frame, it follows them around and blocks them out the whole time. That'd be great. It's still work. It's still an effort. But the thing about body cameras, to circle back to the bigger question, is they're kind of a blessing and a curse. I think more of a blessing than a curse, but they are both. They are a blessing in that I don't know if you can hear my dog. He's dreaming back there.
Yeah, he's good.
He's chasing a rabbit in his sleep.
Yeah.
But if you go on a call and everything that happens is recorded at a scene, and so it really insulates officers against any kind of a false accusation. I mean, people can file a complaint and say you were rude, or you said this, or I did that, and if you pull the tape and it's not there, that's pretty cut and dry. And people learned that early on. As you mentioned, of course, you if you do something dumb, you are caught on tape being an idiot for a minute. That's not great. But the thing that I really was concerned about when I was going through this process, and the thing that I brought up repeatedly, is a body camera is one fixed perspective of one moment in time. And often it gets, if there's a physical confrontation, you can't see anything anyway. If you're lucky, there are multiple officers there, you have multiple viewpoints. But if all you have is one viewpoint, this isn't the NFL, where you have ultra high definition at 65 different angles, and we're going to know if the toe was in bounds or out of bounds. It may not be definitive, and yet people kind of had that expectation that this was going to solve. There was never going to be any question what happened anymore, and that was a little bit naive, and I think people who thought that were a little bit ignorant of the realities of police work, because there are so many factors that go into it, and so I think on the whole, I'm pro body cameras for sure. I just temper that with the caveat that let's remember these other factors, and let's remember that it is one aspect of the situation, one resource that we can look at to determine what happened. And it can be definitive, but often it is less than definitive. And so we can only put how much weight on it that it merits. There may be other factors that have to be weighed in too. And the other thing, honestly, where the media is concerned, is these videos are often shown with no context and only portions of them. And sometimes that can be a problem, because if you don't know what led up to that situation, the response may seem unreasonable. But if you saw the entire situation, you realize it was entirely reasonable. It might not be pretty. Violence is never pretty, but occasionally it's necessary. And when you don't see the lead up, that can change how you view something. And of course, a lot of media outlets, it's about sensationalism.
Yeah.
So that's my rant on body cameras.
Yeah, it's good. It's one thing I didn't think about, especially back then, maybe not so much these days, is the price, not just of the unit, but of the storage, and then how to deal with requests to see it. Because back then you probably didn't have as many people that were trained in it, plus storing it more difficult than probably today, where you just get a server somewhere for the department. Right. You can probably put a whole lot of stuff on it. Yeah, I never thought about that part of it. But yeah, the good and the bad of that in the perspective is definitely, it's one of those things where people see what they want to see. If they don't see the whole thing, that's even worse. But maybe if you're a department and you're getting a lot of requests for it, you put the whole thing out there on your website or whatever,
right?
Even if the press doesn't do it, so you can say, here's the whole thing.
Yeah. Yeah. And that was another question that came up, was at what point do we consider it, releasable? Are we influencing a potential jury pool if we release a video before the case is completely adjudicated? And you know as well as I do that police departments, sheriff's offices, all different law enforcement agencies often take a public relations hit because they have to maintain some degree of privacy or investigative integrity to a case. And, there were situations in my career where there was information I really wish we could have released, would have made us look a lot better in the public eye. But, it wasn't appropriate. In some cases, it wasn't legal to release it. And above all, I think when you're involved in public service, like law enforcement, like a number of other professions, there's a higher standard, and you need to adhere to it. You need to meet that standard. And sometimes that means taking a poke in the nose that you don't deserve.
Yeah. I think I've seen some departments. I don't know if the department I was in did it back then, but I bet they do something like that now, where they would bring in, if it was a shooting, you'd bring in the officer involved or whoever's involved. You show them the tape or all the recordings you have. And then you bring in, if it's a big thing and you got a lot of people asking about it, you bring in the family or the person that was also in the shooting, if they're still around, or the family of that person, and you show them all the stuff. So at least they know. And then if the press says, we're just going to show these little clips of it to either enrage the populace or try to make it not a big deal when it is a big deal, then at least you have the people that are involved in it know it, especially if they're giving an account for it. I mean, I feel like from the IA perspective, the internal affairs perspective, they would want you to write down your account before you saw the replay. But
that was a point of contention. I mean, one of the things that I did with this year-long project regarding body cameras was to put together a committee. Imagine that, an administrator put together a committee. What a surprise!
I like it. I like it.
But my thought was, look, I've been. I mean, this was like 2011 or 2012. I'd been a sergeant since 2004, so I was 8 years removed from working the street every day. I need to make these decisions. I need to do my job, but I need the opinion and the input of people who are doing the job. Again, that heavy lifting where the rubber meets the road. And so I put together a real eclectic mix of patrol officers from different shifts with different backgrounds, a SWAT officer, field training officers, people who worked in the daytime and the nighttime and so forth, and got their input on everything. And we had a meeting every month and talked about different stuff. They tried the cameras out, both I think we tested about 3 or 4 different brands. And one of the things that we discussed and that was brought up repeatedly was exactly what you just mentioned. How are we going to handle complaints? So I go on a call, I have an interaction. Maybe it's an arrest, and so there's a use of force. Maybe it isn't a reportable level of force, meaning it's just a handcuffing or a joint lock situation, nothing more than that, which doesn't tend to be investigated beyond the initial police report. But regardless, now I'm going to go into internal affairs and be interviewed about it. Well, I want to watch the video first. I want to refresh my memory. And some officers were very adamant that they wanted that. Other people argued, well, that's going to unduly influence your testimony. We want what you remember, not what you watched on the video. And so there's a big heated debate about this. And I had my own opinion, and I didn't see a problem with them seeing the video personally. But others did. And so, I mean, we've been talking about this for some time now, and we've only really scratched the surface of the different concerns and clarifications and decisions and policies that need to be made for something like that. And there are no doubt best practices in the profession today where smart people have figured those out and have them in place. And maybe they're not the same everywhere, but I'm sure that there's industry practices that we could draw on. I'm not familiar with them because I left the job in 2013. So, but it just goes to show you that it's not, as this is just one little sliver of policing, and everybody was like, hey, slap a camera on that guy or gal as they're out there policing, and problem solved. And it's like, yeah, some problems will be solved, and a whole other considerations need to be taken into
Yeah.
effect. We can't just do that. You can't just slap it on and go. It doesn't work that way. There are legal and personnel and labor and technical and logistical considerations. All these things need to be taken care of to do it right. Otherwise, you're just causing more problems. But me saying that, in some circles of those critical of the police at the time, was viewed as me making an excuse because I didn't want the cops to wear body cameras, because then they'd be caught doing all the bad things that they do. Right.
Yep.
That's the criticism that came from some quarters. I mean, I'm simplifying it and kind of adding a tiny bit of hyperbole to make the point, but that was kind of their view. And
I mean, it's a good argument. I mean, I can see the merit of it, but I also see the problems with implementing something like that. It's like all the stuff we've talked about, just the cost and what are you going to do and how many people are you going to hire and what's the burden on the taxpayer now that you have this much more stuff you're going to need because you're recording every transaction that police go through. My
recommendation was that we do it. My absolute recommendation was that we do it. But also that we pay close attention to these other issues and resolve them as part of the implementation process. And therefore, it's not going to happen tomorrow. It might take a year or 2 years to implement. And of course, for people who want reform immediately, and they don't see that you're in the process of reforming something or adopting something. They don't see it in place. Therefore, you're resisting. And, that comes back to something else we talked about, which is communication skills. I mean, as a police agency of some kind, you kind of have to be a lot better at communicating than maybe we have been in some instances. Might have saved ourselves a little trouble if we were better communicators with the public than we sometimes are. One-on-one, cops are great. Patrol cops are great at communicating. It's not always a friendly communication based on the situation, but by and large, if you're going to be a cop for very long, you learn how to talk to people, and not just boss them around or try to intimidate them or whatever. You learn how to talk to people. It's sadly not necessarily always a skill that administrators take with them when they promote in relationship to talking to the public, because I think if we did a better job of explaining ourselves and sharing as much as we possibly could when people ask questions, we might enjoy greater trust than we do. Wherever we are on that trust scale, we might be a little higher if we were focused on that. But
yeah, I think that same thing that made you feel like the military wasn't the best thing because of asking why probably made you great police on the street, because that's what you want to do, is ask why. My whole thing of explaining policing was look for trouble, be nosy, solve problems. That's what police do when you're out on the street. So
how many serial killers have been solved, like not solved, but broken open, right, by the fact that a nosy patrol cop made a stop and started looking around a little bit more than just enough to write the ticket,
Yep.
Detectives who have broken open cases have done so by being tenacious and continuing to ask questions and go back at evidence and return to scenes and re-interview witnesses and try to look at things from another perspective. So yeah, those traits are absolutely essential, I think, to being good at policing.
I think that also transfers over to writing, because you put yourself in the perspective of the reader. And oftentimes I did that in policing, is let me take a step back and look at the perspective of this person I'm talking to. What's on their mind and what are they seeing? So when you're writing, that's a good way to check yourself too. When you're writing is I know what I'm saying, but does somebody else know what I'm saying? So how do you think that when you started writing after policing, do you think it changed a lot as to how you did your writing, especially your crime and that type of writing?
Yeah, absolutely. Because that skill that you just mentioned is another critical skill, an interpersonal skill that I think all good police have. They will have the empathy and the compassion, even for somebody maybe that under some circumstances might not seem like they deserve it. They're a criminal. They've just done something bad.
Mhm.
But being able to do that and put yourself in that other person's shoes long enough to at least understand their perspective is so valuable to your investigation. It is also a skill that I think you can take with you into leadership roles and stop and look at, all right, if I'm pushing a cruiser, how does this change in policy look like to me? Oh, it probably looks like, XYZ, when really our purpose is ABC over here. So how do I make sure I communicate that? Because, if you don't ever consider how a patrol officer or a detective or somebody doing the work is going to be affected by that, then you're not gonna even have that. It's not even going to occur to you. And
Yeah.
in writing fiction, if you want anything other than cardboard characters, you have to do the same thing. And even if you've created a character who is utterly despicable and unlikable, as the author, you need to be able to get in their skin long enough to give them a fair shake on the page as being a three-dimensional character. They might be horrible, and you may bring them to a horrible end justifiably, but and the reader may hate them, might
Mm.
completely despise them, but that's okay because at least they care enough about them to despise them, and that's because they see them as a three-dimensional character. Two-dimensional or cardboard characters, people don't get too worked up about them, and that's not a good thing if you're writing fiction. So I think you're correct. I think that is a transferable skill when it comes to writing fiction.
Yeah. There was a time if I had an interview and they said, "What's your greatest weakness?" I would say, I never had an interview where this came up, but this is just what you think about when you're sitting waiting for grand jury or you're in court or whatever. And I think the thing would be the empathy, because if you have too much empathy, you can't
Mhm.
get anything done. You have to be
Mhm.
able to say, okay, let me look at it from their perspective. Good. If you had so much empathy, you'd never write a ticket. You never write a traffic
Right.
infraction. You never do any of that. You listen to everybody's story and go, oh man, that's tough.
Nobody would
Okay.
go to
Well,
jail for anything.
yeah. Yeah. And the main reason I liked policing was the idea of it before it and then doing it was you're going to take action. If you see something wrong, there is no question that you're going to do something. And the great part about it is you get trained on what to do. So that's great. That's the essence of policing for me, was that. And
Mhm.
it's hard nowadays. It's easier because it's been so long since I've done policing, but you see things that are wrong and you want to address it, and then you're like, well, now I got a lot of things to worry about, because number one, I don't have the training I used to. It's, it's 10 years old,
Attribute.
so what's different? Yeah. And then what's going to happen civilly if I do something? So you have a lot more on your mind, that when you're the police, you can be more bold. And when you have good training, that's even better. That's even better.
Right.
I did, after I left Virginia in 2012. We were over in the Pacific Northwest. We lived in Washington and Oregon, and I thought about applying for Washington State Police, but they wore bow ties, and I just couldn't do it. I just couldn't do that. And
Where
we
did you
went.
live at in Washington and Oregon?
We were originally in Tacoma,
Uh-huh.
or Tecompton, as they say, and then we went to Vancouver after that. But between those, we lived in an RV for about a year, drove around the US for my wife's work. She was in sales, had a bunch of different accounts. And we went to all of the 48 contiguous states. And that was a great way to see the country. Great way.
Yeah, I
And
bet.
then,
I bet.
then we had two dogs while we were doing that, it's just like you're in a living room driving down the road. They had a great time. But
Yeah.
then we moved to Salem, Oregon.
Yeah.
And when I went there, I did a ride along with the Salem PD, the city PD, because I was like, let's see if this is something, if I get back into policing, if we're going to be here for a certain amount of time. You don't want to go through all the academy, a year of 6 months to a year of a hiring process, 6 months to a year of training, and then move. So I went and did a ride along with them. Great people. I like the organization, but coming from being a trooper in Virginia, number one, the West Coast is different. I mean, that's a different circuit court, or, the whatever circuit out there, 4th or 7th or whatever it is. Ninth. So the laws are a little different in their application. And then just riding around with the city police, it seemed you had to go to a roll call first, and then you had to go to a roll call at the end of the shift. So right there, I was like, ooh, I don't know if I like that. I like the idea of not seeing a supervisor for at least a month if you wanted to. Like, if you could probably put that together as being a trooper. And this one, they had to call a sergeant for almost everything. They're like, I got a DUI. I'm going to call a sergeant to come up. And I'm like, oh, geez, this is tough. And then I ended up I'd volunteered there, like cleaning police cars and things like that for a little while, and then got on with the Department of Public Safety Standards and Training in Oregon, which is their academy that teaches all the police and everything. We didn't have anything like that in Virginia. Everyone had their own separate academy. And while in Oregon, their state police has their own academy stuff they do, they are still involved in that one. And man, that was 2016, 2017. And I was a part-time tactical and skills instructor. So I did defensive tactics and patrol stuff where you're out in the fake town and you're doing traffic stops and all that. And they let me go to a constitutional law class that the academy students go to. And that was good because I got to refresh my memory of those things, plus see the West Coast way versus the East Coast way. And man, that was great training out there. What a great place. We didn't have anything like that when I was in Virginia, but the State Police Academy in Virginia still had great training on its own. And I'm glad and fortunate that I started policing in a place that had such great training. And by far the best job I ever had was policing. But
and training is the great equalizer. I was very fortunate that a high premium was placed on training at my department. You were over near Tacoma and Vancouver. That's the west side of the state. I was on the other side of the Cascades over in Spokane, and currently I'm in Central Oregon, so on the other side of the mountains from where you were here in Oregon as well.
Snoqualmie, on the other side of Snoqualmie.
Yeah, way over. Spokane's almost to the Idaho border, and Redmond's right smack in the center of Oregon near Bend. But training is crucial. And I mean, there's a saying in law enforcement that when a critical incident occurs, you don't rise to the occasion so much as you fall to the level of your training. And so it's crucial. And unfortunately, in some places in the country and in some departments, and it's usually a time and money issue, there isn't as much training, or they get the training initially and there's not in-service training to refresh and update the training that they've received. And boy, I mean, you can operate with a smaller group of people if they're well trained, but no amount of people helps you get it done if they're not well trained. So I'm glad you got good training from Virginia State. State police generally are, get the funding and put a focus on that in most states. But out here on the West Coast, I would say that is something that gets a lot of focus. Is let's spend the time and money up front training, so that we're not having to spend the money on the back end settling lawsuits because people did things that they shouldn't have done or didn't do them well, and resulted in us getting sued for something.
Yeah, in Oregon, I liked the way they did it because they had all their police were trained there and trained the same: police, probation, parole, corrections. The fire department also was trained there, but they are on a separate program. And wow, what a huge difference that would make, I think, being on the road. And I was never sworn police on the West Coast. I just did that training thing, and wow, it made me feel better about policing, or the future of policing anyway. And then just being there, we were there through 2017, and that's when you started having a lot more unrest and people in Portland stopping the interstate and doing marches and all that. That's even before the shutdown, which I'm sure is worse now, but was fortunate to end up in Florida for the shutdown. So that was good. I think being in Oregon would have been a little different, especially in the valley. Maybe if you're out in Bend or on the coast or out east, it's a little better.
Yeah, there wasn't nearly the civil unrest, I guess would be the way to put it. Here in Central Oregon, there were certainly politics at play, but larger cities like Seattle and Portland, I think, I think there's usually more activity there. I think there's more. I think those are cities that draw. In some instances, folks of a similar mindset are attracted to living there. So you get more folks with a similar mindset living together. That happens everywhere in the country. Different mindsets in different places that are more dominant. I try to stay out of politics as much as I can, because the reality is that if we spent a little more time looking at the ways that we are similar than the ways we're different, we get rid of a lot of conflict. But unfortunately, we've become very polarized, and this has caused a lot of problems for us as a country. And I hope the pendulum swings back the other way where this is concerned, and that people start to be a little bit more willing to have different views without deciding that because we have different views, now we're enemies. I mean, that's just an extremism that I'm not too comfortable with.
It seems like that middle ground has gotten folded over with the two extremes, and you just have the extreme sides are getting all the voice when
the
middle ground's not there, just as you said.
Yeah. All the noise is coming from the margins, and certainly they have an outsized amount of noise, and I don't think they're the majority, but they do gobble up a whole lot of bandwidth.
Yeah. Well, that goes along with collaboration, and I know you've done some collaborative writing before. What kind of topics were, not just with the textbooks and thing, but have you done fiction writing collaborating?
So 5744, give me just a second. My cat's going crazy. I don't know if you can hear him or not.
Yeah. Now?
Yeah, he's good now. So hopefully he won't make a whole lot of noise now that he's in here.
No, good. Cats need to see what's going on.
He needs to come in here and tell me what's what.
Yeah.
I've written probably about 15 books with different authors. I wrote a 4-book series with a guy named Jim Wilski from Texas. That was kind of a hard-boiled grifter sort of series called the Anya series. I wrote a trio of books with a New York based, although now he's down in North Carolina, author named Lawrence Kelter. We wrote a couple of police procedurals and a dark comedy. And then I wrote a trilogy called Bricks and Cam Jobs with Eric Beatner. And that's a series of a couple of assassins. It's kind of I would say action and a little bit of dark humor thrown in, but mostly action that I wrote with him. And then I wrote one of my River City books with a guy named Colin Conway, who was also a police officer in Spokane at the time. And so we wrote this book that takes place in the River City universe, which is where my police procedurals are set. And then about 8 or 10 years later, or more than that, I guess. Well, yeah, about 10 years later, he came to me and said, "Hey, I got this idea for a series about like an officer involved shooting and the aftermath of it and everything, but I don't want to get over my skis on some of the stuff that happens at the administrative level and the city level and things like this." And his experience was as a patrol officer, and then he was in a specialty position as a liaison to the business community, and then near the end of his brief career, 5-year career, he was involved with the union. And so he had these really great perspectives, but none of them were in command roles or in even leadership roles of any kind. And so I was like, yeah, the story sounds great. Let's do it. And so we wrote Charlie 316, which is the name of the book.
Okay.
And that ended up, we realized the story wasn't over when we thought it was. And so that has become a series that we work on together. There's a 4-book arc in there that kind of follows that initial shooting that takes place and the aftermath of it. It takes about 4 books to wrap everything up. One of the main characters in that is a guy named Tyler Garrett. So we kind of call it the Garrett saga or the Garrett arc. And then since then, we've been writing books set in that universe after that 4-book arc in the timeline, but all of them kind of function as standalones. The first one after that was called The Ride Along, and it's a book about a police officer who's just a model patrol officer, 3rd generation cop, bleeds blue, has very, very police centric opinions that he came by honestly. He's a good person. One night he is assigned a ride along, a teacher who is also a police reform advocate as part of a local push for police reform. She's also a good person who came by her opinions very honestly, but their opinions are very different. And so they're going to be in a patrol car for 10 hours on a graveyard shift for this ride along. And the book is about the conversations that some of are a little heated that they have as they go from call to call. And it was really born out of this sort of polarization that we were talking about a few minutes ago. I wanted to address that specifically within the police realm. And so I got to write all of the points I ever wanted to make as a cop. I got to have that officer give voice to them and because they were of a concern to him too. But then all of the criticisms that I've heard and some of which I think are extraordinarily valid, I got to let the teacher, the ride along, give voice to those. And so, it eventually gets to the point in the story where there's a critical incident, and I'll leave it at that. Let the reader discover what happens.
Okay.
And then we're working on the 6th book in the series now, which is more of a historical, takes place in 51, 74, 03 in the present day. So it's this like almost generational mystery that's being investigated. So those are the collaborations that I've done.
How do you determine the length of those as far as just the book length? Do you just go as long as the story needs, or?
Yeah, I've always believed, so like traditional publishing will tell you if it's this genre of book, it needs to be between this length, and that's non-negotiable and blah, blah, blah. And those are all market considerations. This is because this is what people have bought in the past, and so we assume this is what they're going to buy in the future. I've always thought that was kind of artificial. I think every story has its own natural best length. And if you have an idea, write the story. And if it's a short story, then you may have to revise it in a way that makes it work as a short story. But if that's what the story is, then write it that way. If it's a novella, it's a novella. If it's a 50,000 word novel or 150,000 word novel, that's what it is. Of course, you're going to edit and tighten and make better. And I'm not saying pad things or cut them to get under a certain word count or whatever. But, I've always felt like just it needs to be the length that it needs to be to tell the story in a way
Yeah.
that's satisfying. And so I have some short novels that are 40,000 words. I have some 120,000 word ones. And like this one that we're working on now, Colin and I, is probably going to be the longest in the series. It's well over 100,000. Even after we get done with editing it, I don't see how it's going to be less than 100,000 words.
Wow.
So I think people will argue, and it's a good argument, that what I'm saying is wrong because it represents a lack of discipline. Like, you should be disciplined enough to bring your book in between 70 and 75,000 words, or whatever, pick your
Hmm.
arbitrary number. And I just don't buy that. I think that's artificial. I think you tell the story and then you decide, okay, I told this story, but I got a little fat here. I can cut it. I don't need that to tell the story. But particularly on first writing, I'm a big fan of, you've got your outline, your loose outline, or however you do it. Some people just pants it. Write the story, see how long it is, and then go from there.
Yeah. I visualize stories sometimes as like people. Like, some stories are a bodybuilder and other stories are a runner. And you're just creating the clothes. The clothes is that story for that person. So
It's a
you
good
gotta,
analogy.
you need to have what you need to have. But as long as you're not wasting the reader's time, I think you're okay.
Yeah, that long distance runner doesn't need to be wearing a parka. You
Yeah.
know, cut, take
Yeah.
the parka off. But don't. Likewise, I don't think that the bodybuilder needs to be wearing a half shirt that doesn't even cover their nipples. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Or, they need a little more. So yeah, every story has its own natural length. That's my operating philosophy and has been for a long time. And that's probably one of the reasons why I wasn't very successful in the traditional publishing arena with anything more than anything bigger than small presses, because I kind of bridled at those requirements being artificially in place. Um, and that's just me. I'm not saying people who write that way are wrong. They're not. If that works for them, then they're right. But that's not what works for me.
I think that's one of the great things about the self-publishing world, especially like Amazon, KDP, is that you just, if you like it, someone else is going to like it. You just have to find them. And really, you just have to write it and put it out there. And then there's definitely books I'd prefer to read holding a book, and books I'd prefer to read on a Kindle. And
Mhm.
if you can, like the one I read of yours, The Concrete Smile, I'm not sure what you consider that. But when it came up on the Kindle, it would go through the percentages about 1% every page. So that was nice because you could go, oh, I'm making some headway. Uh, it's not an 800 page normal print book that is 3,000 some pages on the Kindle. So it kept me going. And I was like, okay, good. And then I noticed on that one in particular, about maybe it's halfway through, or maybe it's a third of the way through. It picks up a lot when they start doing, extending the job past the original job. And
Right.
I was still looking at the percentage when I'm reading it because I wanted to finish it before this. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to buckle down and finish this thing. And then I got to 80% and it was done. And I think you have another story, or a sample of a story after that. So really, that one came out to about 80 pages of on a Kindle, and I have the small Kindle, one of the first ones. And man, it was just good because I got to the end. I was like, this feels like the end. And yeah, it was the end. And
Mhm.
what do you consider that story? Do you call that a novella? Do you call it a short story? I mean, it's obviously longer
I
than a
would
short
I
story.
would I would call it either a long short story or a short novella based on
Yeah.
its length. Um, and those terms have gotten a little looser, at least in common usage. than they used to be. It used to be very well defined what, this much is a short story, this much is a novella, this is a novelette, and I could never remember the difference between the two. And this is at least this long to be a novel, and unless it's this genre, in which case it has to be this long, and blah, blah, blah. That series that you're talking about, a Grifter's Song, series that I created, and I wrote about 7 of the episodes, or 6 of the episodes. I'm trying to remember now. But there were 35 total episodes, and each was a standalone. So the sample that you will have seen at the back of that was written by a different author. It was written by J.D. Rhodes, who wrote People Like Us, the second book in the series. And I was the editor for all 35, in addition to writing 5 or 6 of them. I think I wrote 6. I think there were 29 other authors. So I guess whatever that math works out to.
I didn't realize that. That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
To have that many different people in there.
And well, and each is a standalone. Like, it's about Sam and Rachel, who you read about, who are grifters, and they're a couple, and they're kind of, in every episode, it's in a different location. In every episode, they have a different con that is seen through to the end. There's a resolution to that particular con. Each episode's written by a different author, with the exceptions of the ones that I wrote. So they have their own style. They were given latitude. They could write it from Sam's perspective, Rachel's, first person, second person, or third person rather. I don't think I would have taken a second person, but other than that, first person, third person, multiple viewpoints if they wanted to. Doesn't have to be from Sam or Rachel's viewpoint. Whatever they wanted to do within certain guidelines, I put together kind of a series Bible for people to kind of understand what the playing field was. And so any one of them stand alone, but there's also an series arc as they're dealing with being on the run from the Philadelphia mob, as they go through all these different, adventures, if you will, these different cons. They're kind of the bad guys of the series in a way, even though they're the heroes, because they're grifters. But most of the world can go spit, but they're there for each other. That's what they love most in the world, each other in the game. And so, 35 episodes. It just wrapped up here in the fall of 2023 with the 35th and final episode that I wrote. Those stories are the only stories I have right now that are published by a different publisher. Down Out Books actually publishes those. So that represents pretty much my only work that is not under my own banner.
So what's your experience then with when you did your first thing published? How'd you do that? What was that published through?
That was my first, we're just talking books here, right? I mean, I had short stories and stuff published in different places, but first book was published by a small publisher in Georgia called Wolfmont Press. It was pretty much a one-man operation, and I had been invited to submit stories for an anthology that they were publishing called 7 by 7, which was 7 authors, 7 deadly sins, and each author wrote a story about each of the deadly sins, and then they all had to be mysteries less than 600 words, so very, very short, and had to have some sort of a twist to them. And so there were 7 of us that were chosen. We had to submit a story and get chosen based on that. And so after that came out, I started talking to the guy a little more about my first book, and he ended up publishing it. And that's Under a Raging Moon, which was the first book in my River City series. It was a police procedural. It is a police procedural. So then when I think I'd already started on the second one by the time that was published. And when I sent him the second book, which is called Heroes Often Fail, he's like, I can't publish this. I was like, what do you mean you can't publish it? I mean, does it suck? I mean, what happened? I'm confused. And he said, no, it's actually better written than the first book, I think, but I can't publish it because the whole story is about a child in peril and nobody will read that. And so I can't publish it. And I was like, I kind of don't think you're right about that, you know? And so we got into a bit of a back and forth over it. He did a couple of survey monkey polls with like 12 respondents to prove to me that nobody, you know, real leading questions and stuff. I should have printed it out and saved it. But I
Yeah.
finally said, well, all right, if you're not going to publish it, you're not going to publish it. I'll take it elsewhere. And he's like, okay. But, you know, I mean, I'm going to continue to publish this first book until the contract runs out. So I was like, oh, geez. Okay. So then I went and found a publisher for the second book, a Florida-based publisher that was just kicking off. And it really happened the same way. I was in an anthology with 3 different short stories. It was called The X Factor. So it was a story about bad exes coming to a bad end.
Okay.
So
Nice.
I gave 3 stories to that. And then I said, hey, are you interested in police procedurals? And she was like, yeah, let me read it. And sure, we'll do it. And then when the book, you know, contract comes up from the first book, you know, just don't renew it and we'll reissue it. I was like, great, you know, and they did a really good cover. In fact, normally when I don't have the virtual background up, you can see the book cover poster on the wall behind me. They did a really good job. In fact, they put it out in hardback too. It's the first time I ever had anything in hardcover, not just paperback. But unfortunately, it was a small press. They had 3 or 4 people working there. And I think it was a couple, and they had an assistant and a part-time person as well. And they just overextended. They put out too many books at once and couldn't get any advertising dollars behind any one of them enough to power them into the, you know, the public eye enough. And they just went under. So about that time, I got the rights back to the first book. So now I'm sitting there. It's like 2009 or so. 2008, 2009, something like that. I've got my first book and my second book, and I've written the third book, and the first 2, both have already been published, but neither of them are published now. They don't have a home, you know? And so I'm completely like, what do I do here? And one of the frustrations I had in dealing with both of the first 2 publishers was the distance. Like I was reliant on, you know, telephone or email, and sometimes I didn't get answers very quickly. And the second publisher kind of went radio silent for a while they were trying to figure out what to do. And it was just very frustrating. Turned out up there in Spokane, there was a guy that had a print shop, and he decided he wanted to start a publishing, small publishing house. A cottage, I guess. And so it's called Gray Dog Press. And I went up and I talked to him, and he was a super nice guy and was very excited about the idea of, you know, here's a local publisher with a local author publishing books that are set in the local environment. You know, let's do it. Let's go local, you know, buy your food local, buy your books local. That was kind of the thing, right? So he published republished the first 2 books and published the third book, ended up publishing the fourth one eventually too. Only wanted to publish the paperbacks, so I ended up publishing the ebooks myself at that point because I wanted them to be available. And then, you know, I didn't publish another book in the River City series for quite a while. After I retired, I kind of took a little bit of a hiatus from that series. I was writing other police related stuff, but I didn't write a River City book between 2011 was the 4th book, and I didn't write another one until 2018. And during that time period, Russ Davis, the head of Gray Dog Press, he was like, this is too much, I guess. You know, I mean, I'm too much of my time is over here, and I've got the money is being made by the printing business. So what am I going to do? And finally he decided I'm going to contract, and I'm just going to publish. They had a really successful trail guide and a couple of things like that they published that did really well. They decided to contract back to just publishing those. And so he let me know, and he gave me the print rights back and gave me the covers. I was able to use the cover the covers for a while until I had them redone. And it was a very amicable, I wouldn't even call it a divorce exactly, but, kind of went our separate ways. Somewhere in that time period, I had published a bunch of my own work, but then I also had started publishing work with Down and Out Books, which was an up and coming kind of niche publisher. They focused on dark crime fiction or gritty crime fiction almost exclusively. And they were definitely on the rise when I started with them. And that's who I pitched the Grifter Song idea to. And that's where they took it on, and we did it there. And so a good number of my books, not the River City books ever, but a good number of the Anya series, the Bricks and Cam Jobs, even the Troy 316 series initially, were all with Down and Out Books. Unfortunately, it costs money to advertise and to market, and smaller presses don't tend to always do such a great job of that because it costs money. And I got to a point where I realized, they're not really doing any marketing. And when you look at publishing, like, what is it that a publisher can do for you today that you can't do for yourself if you are willing to pay for it or willing to learn it? You're writing it. You don't need a publisher to write it. You can commission a book cover. There's a huge market out there for people who do book covers. There's no reason you can't have your own book cover made, or if you're so inclined, you can do your own, but that's not my talent at all. But there are plenty out there who will do that. Editing, same thing. You don't need a publisher to be well edited. You can hire that done, or come to other arrangements to where your work is well edited. And marketing. You can spend your own money to market. But what I kind of came to the conclusion of when I looked at this was, well, the publisher can really do two things for me. And one of those was marketing. The other one was essentially, legitimization, right? Like cachet, who publishes your work? Oh, well, this publisher, dun, 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 that's a big deal.
Yeah.
That this publisher,
some sort of validation.
Yeah, legitimacy, right, is kind of what. Yeah, exactly. And then marketing. And I was like, well, they're not doing the marketing. So now I'm giving up 50% of my royalties to be able to say I'm published by publisher X, in this case, Down and Out Books, and which is by no means unusual in this respect. I mean, there are smaller publishers that do a fantastic job, but generally speaking, there's not a ton of money going out there, a ton of effort going out there to do the marketing compared to what most independent authors do for themselves. So I came to the conclusion that, I'm already publishing my own books on the River City side of things. My Stefan Kopriva mysteries, which are a spinoff of River City, set in the same universe. I'm publishing those myself. If I'm going to do a concerted marketing effort, I might as well have everything under the same banner, all my books. So I met with my co-authors and made sure they were all on board. And then I met with the publisher, and I just basically laid that same argument out for him and said, look, this is a business decision. I have nothing against you guys. I think you're great guys. I consider you friends. But, this isn't working, and this is what I want to do. And so we came to again, a divorce is a strong word, but it was like a divorce. We came to an agreement. Okay, this much money for that. This, I get that. You get this kind of stuff. And I put it all under my own banner and publish it all myself now. And there's a certain satisfaction to having that level of control, to deciding when a book comes out, to deciding what the cover looks like, what the title's going to be. Which book you're going to work on next, everything. But of course, it comes with a corresponding amount of responsibility. You're also responsible to make sure that the cover is a good cover, that that book is well edited, that you're paying for these procedures or these contractors to do the work, or if you're advertising, you're the one paying for it too. So you're putting your own money where your mouth is, for sure. And it's a much more involved level than, well, I don't know. I mean, these days, even if you're traditionally published, you're having to do a lot of your own marketing. I mean, it may not be
Yeah.
your own money, but you're doing a lot of the work. And so at present, except for a grifter song, um, all of my work is under my own banner, under Code 4 Press, except for Charlie 316 series, which my co-author, that series originated with him, and so he's publishing it under Original Ink Press, which is his banner. And so we meet periodically to talk strategy when it comes to being an independent author, because you have to have a certain mindset. You have to be willing to take chances and do things differently, and being willing to pivot. Because I'll tell you, what was working on a marketing level a year and a half ago kind of stopped working, at least for me and most of the authors I look at being on the same tier as me in terms of, uh, public awareness, and, number of books published, and, just experience level, I guess. And so, when that happens, you have to start figuring out, well, okay, what's going to work instead? What do I try? And sometimes it takes a leap of faith. Sometimes you have to try something radically different. To give you an example, I used to, until very recently, from the time I went full independent, uh, buying all my stuff back from Down and Out Books, putting everything under one banner, I was in the Kindle Unlimited program, because that made the most sense to me. And you could advertise a book and make it free, or 99 cents, have it shoot up the charts there on the Amazon site. People notice it. They, the KDP readers, the KU readers rather, they notice it. They go read your book in the Kindle Unlimited program. You get page reads, and that's where you would generate your income. And that did really well for me and for authors like me for quite some time. But that market seems to have dried up, and it isn't as effective for people at my tier. I think it's still working for people at a certain level. I have a friend who it's still working really well for, but this is a guy that's making $250,000 a year as an independent author. And so there's certain algorithm considerations, like Amazon's helping him out quite a bit. So it makes sense for him to still be there. It didn't make sense for me to be there anymore. So what I've done is taken my books and have them poised to go wide again in January of 2024. And I set up a direct sales store, the Code 4 Press store, so people can get the books there directly from me. So I'm not 100% reliant on somebody in the Kindle Unlimited program deciding to read my book in order to make any profit. Now, I don't know if it's going to work or not, because it hasn't come to fruition yet, and you never know until it's been at it for a while. But I know that what was working before stopped working. And so, I mean, we both know the definition of insanity that everybody likes to quote. So I can't keep doing the same thing and expecting a different result. So I'm trying something different. I may have a worse result. You never know, but at least I'm trying something. And ultimately, what are you doing? You're trying to share your stories. So I'm fortunate to be retired and have a pension. And so if I sell one book a month or 1,000 books a month, it doesn't impact whether I eat or not.
Yeah. Do you, when you do for your own publishing, do you do print runs of your books and then store them, or do you use print on demand?
I use print on demand. It's just so much more.
Yeah, it makes sense.
Financially feasible.
Plus, they
If
can
I
do
had
it
a
at
book,
different areas around the country.
yeah, and it opens up a lot of possibilities when it comes to, for instance, still figuring out how I want to try to make paperbacks available through my store. That if you're doing a print run, that changes how you would go about that pretty significantly. So right now, as we're speaking anyway, it's just the digital copies that are available through the store. But I offer them cheaper than they will be, at Amazon or Kobo or Nook or whatever. They're cheaper on my site, and there'll be some exclusive books there as time goes on. And as new releases come out, they're going to be on my site exclusively for 90 days. So the idea being, hopefully readers discover, hey, I can go get the book in February, or I can wait until for $1 cheaper, or I can wait 90 days and pay $1 more just for the privilege of buying it through Amazon or whatever.
Yeah. I can't remember how much I got that one for through Amazon. It wasn't free.
Probably
So,
$2.99, I would say. I think is what they're charging. It's a definitely if somebody's thinking about doing independent publishing, being an independent author, it is an endeavor. It's I wouldn't recommend it as a pursuit that you can do with an hour or two a week. I mean, if you really want to do it right, it does take time. That's not to say that you can't publish your own book and have it available and just let it be there. That's that doesn't take any time. But if you're trying to I guess there's kind of a difference of if you're an independent author versus you're an independent publisher of your own work, it's another step further, I guess, having a website and having a direct sales store and having a bit of a marketing plan and thinking long term and short term and all of these things. I'm fortunate that I had the time for that. If I was working full time, I think I'd probably have a different approach, just because it is very time intensive.
Yeah, I like the learning how to do those things, because you see the stuff that you didn't think about. And the first one I did in 2012 was through a vanity press, and I wouldn't do that again. And then the other ones I've done have all been through Amazon, and I really like their setup. So I'm pretty happy with that. And then I got the original one I did and put that through Amazon too. So I could see the advantage of having your own place, but the amount of time, as you said, it's going to be magnitudes more than if you're setting up an author's page on Amazon versus setting up your own website and then running it.
Yeah.
So
Amazon does a great job. I'm not talking down Amazon at all. The author's page is wonderful. They've updated some of the things about it that make it even better. And there's not a huge steep learning curve to uploading your own ebook onto Amazon. It's not easy the first time, but it's
definitely gotten easier from the first time I did it. Using the program that formats it makes it a lot easier. Putting in the table of contents and all that.
Yeah. And it's like anything, if you do it more than once, you get better at it. But even that first time that you do it, there are guides that can guide you through it. And it's not, it's not super intuitive, but it's not terribly hard either, with some instruction. And then your book's out there and it's available, and that's wonderful. My books are all still available on Amazon, and they will remain there. They're just not in the Kindle Unlimited program, or won't be come January. It's, you just have to decide what it is you're trying to accomplish, and what your time commitment can be, and what your goals are, and you go from there. Like I said, I'm fortunate that being retired, and I view my full-time job at being a writer now. That's what I am. That's what I do. And so I have the luxury of donating, of putting that much focus into things, and hopefully getting the results. But there was a time when I was working full time, and the most I could afford to do time wise was write the book and get it edited, and then get a good cover, and then upload it onto Amazon. And that was about all I did, aside from social media stuff. And, you do what you can do with the situation that you're in. Because if you're a writer, the odds are it's a bit of a compulsion, right? You have a story to tell, you have stories to tell, you're going to write them anyway.
Hmm.
They may just take a different form in how they get out to the world, what kind of packaging they're in, perhaps, but you're going to write them anyway.
Yeah, I think for me, using Amazon has given me, I guess, a little, maybe not accountability, but a little more push to get things out, because it's like, okay, it's not a whole lot of work to do it. It's not a whole lot of money to do it. You just need to do the writing and then put it together to where it's able to be read by someone else, and then put it out there. So I like that version of it. Maybe one day I'll get into the more of the publishing side, but I do like being able to order a copy of your book and being able to have it in your hand, and also to look at it
Right.
on a Kindle. It's pretty cool. So you can at least say you're a writer, even though you do get people every now and then that say, oh, well, you're self-published, but hey.
Yeah, I think hopefully that goes by the wayside. That's why I say independent as opposed to self-published. Just not that self-published is a bad word, or that I would correct somebody, because they are technically accurate. But there's still a bit of a stigma that some people attach to that term. And the one thing that it has done is, for every person like yourself that it is, afforded the opportunity to get your book up and published, and in a way that isn't, so daunting that you don't do it.
Mm-hmm.
There are some people who did the same thing, who they've published crap, and so now there's a sea of crap out there that we're all floating in,
Yep.
and hoping not to be mistaken for. And there's a number of things you can do to avoid that from happening, but it is a danger, of course, if some people hear self-published and that's all they think, and so getting past that sometimes is the challenge. It used to be the challenge was, how do we get into the castle? How do we get published? There's the castle walls, itself, and then there's the walls around the courtyard, and then there's the moat, and, when the drawbridge is up, and, how do we get the drawbridge down and talk to the guards and get the what do you call the trellis thing, or whatever, the
portcullis.
The portcullis, there it is. Not the trellis. That's something you
I like it though. You could put beans on that.
Yeah, it's something for the beanstalk, for the clematis to climb up. And get into the courtyard and knock on the door and get into the throne room. How's that happen? Well, you had to get an agent, you had to get, a publisher, and it wasn't always, there were gatekeepers. It wasn't always easy. What self-publishing did was knock down, fill the moat, knock down the outer walls, and now anybody can just walk into the courtyard, and you're there. And that's great, because people can say what they want. Every book that was ever published by traditional publishers isn't great. There's a lot of crap that was published by traditional publishers, and there still is, because this is art. It's subjective. And so it's not an objective measure of whether you're a good writer or not, whether your book was selected by a New York Times or New York City publisher or whatever. It's that was that individual's judgment. Now, are your odds a little better with more vetting that takes place, that the book is going to be good? Yeah. If I'm the only one vetting my book, versus you are vetted by your agent, by the editor, and maybe someone else at the publishing house, that's 3 people it has to get past. Probably a better, chance, the crappy book isn't going to get through than if it just has to get past one person. But it's not always the case. But so what you have now is everybody milling around in the courtyard, and how do that's not the problem anymore. Now the problem is getting noticed, because we're floating sometimes in the sea of crap I mentioned before. I'm mixing metaphors like in a blender here, but
I like it. Well, it's got a castle, so it can't lose.
Well, and my buddy Colin and I have talked about this, and one of the analogies that we used was, it's almost like we're all at a rock concert. like, and there's a band on stage, they're the Metallica or something, that everybody knows, the Stephen King, level guys, the Michael Connollys or whatever, are up there on stage. Meanwhile, we're all out in the audience and we're all yelling at each other about, I have a book too. What's up? And nobody can hear each other. And so that's kind of what the marketing landscape is like these days, in publishing, right? It was, before it was getting published was your biggest obstacle. Now getting noticed is your biggest obstacle. And obscurity is your enemy rather than rejection. And which is really just a long form of rejection, right? If it goes on long enough. And so it's a different landscape, but it's still, I would still contend that, like anything in these sorts of endeavors, luck plays a huge part. Like just timing, the right person at the right time, the right blurb, the right reader, the right whatever. Anybody that doesn't agree that luck plays a role is full of crap. It does. It absolutely plays a role. Now, does that mean that people who are hugely successful are only lucky? No, not at all. Because in order for that luck to strike, if opportunity comes knocking at the door, you have to answer, right? And you can't be unshaven in your bathrobe in your skivvies, right? I mean, you have to, the quality needs to be there already. You have to do the work. You have to have written a great book. You have to be, that all has to be in place before you get lucky, for the luck to stick. But when it comes to, I think, hitting it big, there is an element of luck to it in life. And that's just the reality of it. And I think anybody who tells you their story, if you listen to it, you'll find that moment of great, incredible luck, be it whether it be timing or an association, or with someone or whatever it is that, propelled them to that next level. Doesn't mean they're talentless and they just got lucky. Not at all.
Right.
But it does mean that luck is there. And so when you're in that concert out in the crowd yelling about your book, how do where does luck come in? How do you get lucky? I mean, I don't think you can try to make luck happen in that way. I think all you can do is try to tell a compelling story with characters that are interesting and that mean something to you. And if you're putting your heart into it, then, readers are going to sense that. And if you don't get lucky in that, grand way that I'm mentioning, you're not suddenly on the New York Times bestseller list, or your books are being optioned for movies or whatever. You take satisfaction from those connections with readers. I mean, when somebody sends you an email and says, I absolutely hate this guy, he was such a jerk. And, well, thank you. I'm glad. That means you wrote a good character, right?
Yeah.
I read this story through my fingers because I was so worried about how it was going to end. These kinds of, testimonials, I guess, from readers tell you you're doing the work, right? You're doing the good stuff you need to do. If lightning strikes and you get that grand luck that can happen, great. If not, you're still making art. You're still connecting with people, and that's really the most important thing. I think it's what sustains me when I don't get hit by that lightning, and see up close sometimes people I know who have been, who do experience it. And I mean, you could eat yourself up over that. You could look at that and go, wait a minute, why did so-and-so win that award? My book's just as good as his book. Why did she get a movie deal? My story is just as exciting as her story. I mean, you could get jealous and envious and just get all wrapped around the axle about it. And I think every writer does at some point in their career, albeit briefly. And you have to come to the conclusion that I've come to pretty quickly, which is, why are you doing this? I mean, my wife reminded me of this when I went through my little hissy fit stage, of why am I not being recognized like all these other people that they're just as good as them. And, instead of celebrating wow, that is so cool. Good for them, which I did do as well. But then, the envy or the jealousy sneaks in at times. And so I was in a little brief period of that. And my wife just said, why are you doing this? Well, why are you engaged in any of this? What's the purpose? And well, the purpose is I'm a writer and I want to write stories that people will read and enjoy and make that connection and leave behind that legacy of here's, X number of books and X number of short stories, and people might know me posthumously from reading them, or at least connect with who I was, leave that behind maybe. And while I'm here, make those connections in real time. And that's why I'm doing this. And she just said, well, then what do you care if, Joe, Jill, or Jane wins X award or gets this, how does that have any impact on what you just described? And the answer is it doesn't. It absolutely doesn't. It's, it's like worrying about what your runtime is when, I got my own 2 feet to worry about, right? What's my runtime? How, am I doing better than I did last time? Am I happy with the run? So that's really helped me keep things in perspective, certainly, and continue to extract quite easily the joy of it, because I'm extraordinarily fortunate. I mean, if you had told me, we started this conversation about, when did you start being a writer? And I told you maybe 10, 13. If you had told me as a teenage boy, young man, that you're going to be at a point in your life where you're going to have a pension and you're going to get up every morning and you're going to pour your coffee in a beautiful Flyers orange cup, and you're going to go into the study and you're going to be a full-time writer, and you're going to have, 50 books out and, 100 short stories published, and you're going to be your own boss. And that's what you get to do every day. I mean, I would have just been over the moon for that. I would have been thrilled. So, and I am, 40 years later.
Yeah, I like the journey of writing. And then as far as the luck goes, you just got to show up, and eventually maybe it happens, maybe it doesn't. But the great part about when you only sell 2 books is that you can increase your book sales by 100%. Buying a copy for your mom and for you, you're doing well.
Well, yeah. Yeah.
As I like to say, I've made
Yeah.
tens of dollars writing.
Yeah. I mean, people ask all the time, like, are you making a lot of money? And I tell them no. I mean, I couldn't live on what I'm making. Not, and that's just the way it is. But that, but it's more than a hobby too,
Yeah.
And so, yeah, and like you said, you've got to show up, and you've got to do the work, and you've got to be ready. I mean, it's almost like being the backup goalie or the relief pitcher or whatever sports analogy you want, you backup quarterback, whatever, I mean, yeah, you got to get lucky by getting the call, like, you get put in the game. But if you can't throw the football, if you can't stop the puck, you can't, if you don't know what a curve is, you can't throw faster than 60 miles an hour or whatever. I mean, you're going to fail. So you have to be ready to answer the call when it comes. And even if, and if it never does, there is there's a certain beauty in just that part of the journey, of being able to do those things. And so, I think embracing that is important if you want to last in this field long term, for sure. Because even popular writers go through periods of time where they're not at all popular anymore, and they're being squeezed out. I mean, look at musicians. It happens there too. Actors, particularly, unfortunately, in the past, especially women actors who, are pigeonholed into certain roles once they reach a certain age. And these things have happened in the past. They're better now. But I guess the point I'm driving at is that even for those uber successful folks, they're going to at some point experience a downturn as well. And so if you don't have a pretty clear picture of your core reason for doing something, then, and how you define success, then it's possible to lose faith a little bit. If you're defining success in how much money you're making as a writer, then you might be very discouraged at some points, or what awards you win or don't win. Same thing, because you can't control any of that. You can influence it, but you can't control it. Whereas if you are focused on telling the story in the best way that you can, perfecting, well, nobody can perfect their art, but working towards bettering your art and making it your writing tighter and so forth. Those things you can't control. And so if you measure success in that arena, you're far more likely to feel successful. And don't we all want to feel successful and as if there's something meaningful happening?
Yeah. I like it. We didn't talk about podcasting or anything. I know you have a lot of podcasts, like 180 or so published, and maybe we do this again sometime and talk more about podcasting and the specifics of the journey of your writing career as far as creativity and things like that. But in the show notes for this will be the links to your website and your Facebook page and Instagram and your other social media stuff. So
Thanks.
I would encourage everyone listening to check it out. Listen, I like the podcast. I've listened to a few episodes of that. So we definitely should talk about that sometime in the future. And
love
you
it.
have anything in closing?
Oh, I think I've said quite enough. I've been blathering on quite a bit. So I guess I would just say thanks for having me on. And if people are interested in finding out more, frankzafiro.com is a pretty good place to start.
Excellent. Thank you for being on and all your words. I will talk to you on the other side of this. All right.
Thank you.